All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started here. Um, Hello everyone. Welcome to the Fueling Collaboration Panel Discussion Series, Season 6. Thank you so much for joining us today. Quick introduction, my name is Lindsay Hosier, and I am the coordinator for the Consortium of Appalachian Fire Managers and Scientists, and it is my pleasure to be hosting today's discussion. Before we do get started, we do have a quick poll to give us a sense of who all is joining us today. So Eric, will you please launch our poll? Awesome. Thank you, Eric. And we do have 3 questions today. Question 1 is what best describes your work? Question 2, where are you physically located? And question 3, how did you hear about today's webinar? Awesome. Thank you everyone for answering. We'll give it another 10 or 15 seconds or so. All right, Eric, if you want to go ahead and close the poll, that would be greatly appreciated. Wonderful. Thank you, Eric. And looking at the results, it looks like we have a lot of land and natural resource managers, a handful of fire practitioners, a few researchers, communications, and a lot of Northeast and Lake states, which is awesome. And the newsletters. Most of you heard about this through the newsletters, so that's awesome. And thank you for answering that poll. We really do appreciate it and look at those results. The Fueling Collaboration Panel Discussion Series is presented by the Joint Fire Science Program Fire Science Exchange Networks in the Eastern United States. And the goals of Fueling Collaboration are to bring together researchers and managers to learn about and discuss the latest in fire science and to build collective learning and collaborative opportunities across the region. And this is our first live discussion of Season 6. Our next discussion, 6.2, will be held on December 11th. Do You Hear What I Hear? A sensory portrait of wildland fire. Discussion 6.2 will be held on January 15th. Storms and Strategy, Understanding the Impacts of Hurricanes on Wildfire and Prescribed Fire in the Southeast. And discussion 6.4 will be held on February 19th, Reframing the Ecology of Fire in Eastern United States Old Growth Forest Ecosystems. If you've joined us in previous years, we're thrilled to have you join us again. If this is your first time participating, all of our discussions follow a similar format as to what you're going to be part of today, which is a group discussion with minimal PowerPoint presentation slides. The discussion is built upon questions that you have submitted in advance, so thank you to everyone who did submit any questions. Participants will be muted and video will be turned off during this discussion. However, the chat box is open and we do encourage active participation in the chat box. And we ask that chat messages stay on point with the discussion and be respectful and inclusive of differing opinions. Today's webinar is being recorded and we will be posting the recording on the Fueling Collaboration website, as well as the Fueling Collaboration YouTube channel. Closed captioning is available and you can access this at the bottom of your screen where it says CC. If you click on that, that will engage the live captioning. And these instructions will also be posted in the chat box as well. And lastly, this discussion is approved for 1.5 Category 1 CFEs by the Society of American Foresters. We will be using the participant list to submit to SAF, so please check the spelling of your name on the screen to ensure that it is spelled correctly. If it is not spelled correctly, click on the 3 little dots next to your name and select rename. And in order to receive these credits, you must participate for the entire program and complete the online attendance form spreadsheet that will be shared in the chat box towards the end of the program. We will compare the completed spreadsheet with our active event participation records. And within 2 weeks of this panel discussion, you will be emailed a certificate of attendance from Polly at Forest Stewards Guild. And if you have any questions regarding the credits, you can reach Polly via email, and we will drop her email into the chat box as well. And today's discussion is focused on protecting and maximizing the size and occurrence of herbaceous upland ecosystems, reflective of contemporary pressures and challenges, with a focus on restoring ancient remnants, old growth grasslands, and reconstructing grasslands. Specifically highlighted will be the value of intergenerational knowledge as well as the regional networks that have emerged from and support specific grassland management prescriptions. Our panelists include Elizabeth Bach, and she is the ecosystem restoration scientist at Nachusa Grasslands for the Nature Conservancy in Illinois. Karen Caljo is the fire manager and restoration ecologist with the Massachusetts Department of Fish and Game, Division of Fisheries and Wildlife. Ron Waka has a long career at Menominee Tribal Enterprises starting in 1988. And Theo Witzel is the co-founder and chief conservation officer for the Southeastern Grasslands Institute. Our moderator today is Paul Charland. He is the coordinator for the Tallgrass Prairie and Oak Savanna Fire Science Consortium. Paul recently retired from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, where he worked in the fire management program for over 20 years. And before I pass it over to Paul to begin today's discussion, I would like to first acknowledge all of our organizers and planning team. They're an absolute incredible team, and it's been such a pleasure working alongside them. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact any of these organizers. And with that, I will pass it over to you, Paul. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Lindsay. Before we get started this morning, we'd like to take a moment to remember our late friend and colleague, Craig Meyer, and to acknowledge his contributions to fueling collaboration. Craig was the coordinator for the Tallgrass Prairie and Oak Savanna Consortium for over 10 years and was one of the early partners in this webinar series. In fact, he was instrumental in developing today's webinar. Beyond this series, he worked with the other fire science exchanges on more projects and events than I can begin to count. He was a committed advocate for grasslands and savannas. In fact, he had a special place in his heart for oaks. He was a great thinker and just a wonderful person. We sincerely miss our friend and colleague. So thank you, Craig. So first, we're going to let our panelists give a very brief overview into themselves, their work, and kind of the context they bring to this discussion. So we'll let them take it from there. I believe, Theo, I think you're first in line, correct?
Okay. Yeah, there's some slides, I think, to be shared.
Oh, here we go.
All right. So hi, I'm Theo Witzel. I'm co-founder and chief conservation officer with the Southeastern Grasslands Institute. We are headquartered at Austin Peay State University in Clarksville, Tennessee. Next slide. But our geography is fairly broad. So we describe where we work as the biogeographic Southeast. So a lot of people will scoff at parts of Pennsylvania or Long Island, New York being part of the Southeast. But biogeographically speaking, there are lots of southern species and natural communities throughout this entire unglaciated part of Eastern North America. And that's how we define our area. We took our mission from a quote by Edward O. Wilson in the foreword of Reed Noss's book, Forgotten Grasslands of the South, that we need to champion the southern grassland biome, one of the most biodiverse biomes in his accounting of all of North America. Next slide. And that covers parts of 24 states, so it's a big area, and we have grown rapidly over the last 8 years. We now have a staff of almost 60 people and working out of all of these areas with stars. Next slide. And our work is very broad, as is our definition of grassland. So we, of course, are interested in prairies and savannas and the sort of classical things that people think of, but also balds, barrens, bogs, fens, dunes, glades, meadows, marshes, river scour barrens, and open woodlands as well. So pretty broad, anything with a biodiversity concentrated in the herbaceous layer. Next slide. And our work is split across 5 major programs. We have a research and mapping program that's working very hard to classify, do a new classification for grasslands of the Southeast. We have a restoration and management program. Our love and true focus is on remnant, old growth grasslands, even degraded ones, but we also engage in reconstruction from scratch. We have a tribal program that works both with tribes that are today have a presence in the Southeast US, but also those with ancestral lands there. And that's in part, we want to work with tribes and collaborate with tribes on conservation work, but also make sure that their interests are incorporated into our work as well, especially things like traditional ecological knowledge and plants of cultural importance. And we have the Southeastern Native Seed Program. We are the Southeastern hub for the Seeds of Success federal program, but also have our own initiative as well. And the last slide is maybe the most important program we have next, is our community engagement program. We are ramping that up right now. We're doing lots of on the ground and sort of digital volunteer engagement work to further our mission. Thanks.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Ron Waka. I'm the forest manager for Menominee Tribe. I put a slide up of the state of Wisconsin, and that's our reservation in the north central. Yep, that's a reservation there. The original lands of the tribe were over 7 million acres of that section of northeast and eastern Wisconsin around Green Bay. Treaty, we ended up with 230,000 acres of what you see there that does sit within our ancestral lands. So we're able to maintain some of that structure and some of the stuff that our ancestors were doing. Our forest shows a real footprint of fire use, where with our dendro work we've been doing, fire scarred trees, looking at red pine, looking at the fire history a lot, and trying to replace some of those grasslands. I know when Craig asked me to present, I'm like, well, we don't have a lot of grasslands discussions, but I knew Craig for a while, so we talked about it and thought that would be a good thing to present here. Let people in to see what we're doing. Go next slide. So that is a satellite image. You can see us from satellite. That's all forested. So 95% of our resource is forested. And there's a lot of ag land all the way around. The national forest, Chequamegon-Nicolet, is on the northeast corner. You can kind of see that scar on the northwest. That's an old tornado scar from 2007, natural disturbance that we are actually in there burning, keeping some of that back, keeping some grass in there and some early successional stuff, because it's northern hardwood dominant up there. That's heavier soil, heavy sugar maple type part of the resource. So gives you the look at what we have. Go next slide, Paul. I just threw a picture in of what we're burning. These are the types of things we're burning in. It's right next to the Wolf River, a beautiful river to the east. You can't quite see it on this picture, but we're identifying these types of openings, these types of opportunities. We call this particular just a wildlife unit. We're keeping it open with fire, monitoring the grasses that are coming back. Been burning this particular one for about 30 years. As you can see in the west part of the photo, that's our forest management activities of a red pine plantation being converted. It got a little rocky there, otherwise I'm sure they would have wanted to put a few more red pine, but we're good as far as it went. We keep burning and keep those open and monitor. We photo game cams and stuff to keep track of what we got. But that photo's from a DNR patrol plane. That gives us a real, I like to think that that's how it looked when our ancestors were burning, when they were keeping fire on landscape. All through this area of this photo, there's old remnant fire scarred trees and stuff. So like I said, we try and identify and bring fire back in. Next one, Paul. This particular, this is a pine shelterwood. So this is really Western science, white pine shelterwood, trying to regenerate this 180-year-old white pine stand back to white pine. But in the meantime, we're burning it. So what we're waiting for is a seed development on those particular pine. And the seed years get 7 years apart, but we're maintaining it with fire. And we're creating these ecosystems while we're holding, and it's a really good, the tribal members are using it. Our folks are using it to gather. We got berries growth in there. So we're kind of doing, like I say, the traditional knowledge and the Western science kind of come together here. We're doing a white pine shelterwood, holding it with fire. Tribal members are using it for gathering purposes. So that's a really nice look. Otherwise, if we don't put fire back in, it just gets invaded with hardwood, comes back really, really thick. So we keep it open with fire. So that's a little bit of what we're doing here. Thank you.
Morning, folks. I'm Karen Caljo. I'm the prescribed fire manager with Mass Wildlife within the Department of Fish and Game. And I've been with Mass Wildlife for about 10 years, and prior to that, the state of Virginia and elsewhere throughout New England, and working in prescribed fire for about 30 plus years. So I'm really excited to be here today as we discuss our grassland management with our colleagues. And we conduct prescribed fire on a variety of habitats and natural communities throughout Massachusetts. And that includes oak woodlands and pine barrens, as well as grasslands and fens. And so we think of these grasslands as a mosaic within larger landscape settings as well. So, and I think we'll talk about that a little bit today. Our priorities are guided by what we call the State Wildlife Action Plan, known as the SWAP. And we have a new draft of that State Wildlife Action Plan that's online, and we've included it in the references. So I encourage you to take a look at that. It highlights the 620 plants and animals across the state, which are considered species of greatest conservation need. And at least 100, I think it's 100 or in 8 or more of those are grassland dependent species. So there's information on all of those species, and that will actually provide some guidance for management as well. So if you could move to the next slide, that would be great. The types of grasslands that we work in, we categorize them into 4 major types: sandplain grasslands and heathlands, as you can see in the lower right-hand corner. And those are little blue stem dominated with a variety of herbaceous species. And then maritime grasslands, and featured on the upper right. And those are primarily in our coastal islands. They're a combination of grass and shrub dominated areas, and they have switchgrass, little blue stem, and a number of declining plants and animals. So, and then we also work on a number of ridgetop grasslands and heathlands statewide, and learn from our partners in other states throughout New England on management within those systems. And many of our grasslands actually integrate with heath, low bush blueberry, and other types of low heath vegetation, and historically and culturally were managed by humans for hundreds of years to thousands of years. And the grasslands that we manage today, they're on the ancestral lands of indigenous people and people of the Wampanoag, the Quina, Herring Creek, and Mashpee tribes, as well as the Nipmuc and the Stockbridge Munsee Mohicans. So we're encouraged to be working with our indigenous partners and learning from their cultural practices as well. The inland grasslands on the sand plains and river terraces interior in Massachusetts, we're just starting to work on many of those, and we're excited actually to be learning quite a bit about some of the inherent species considerations, as well as some of the challenges in working on those. I didn't include pictures of some of the fens and wetland grassland types that we're working on. I kept it more to the drier grassland for this particular discussion. So next slide, please. I did want to mention that we do burning not only in the dormant season, but also in the growing season when possible. And usually it's the late growing season in order to control woody invasive plants and species like that. But these grasslands are considered biodiversity hotspots. And as I said, there are over 106 species that are found within, and they range from rare plants, species like American chaff seed featured in the center there, which is grassland endemic, requiring fire, to sandplain gerardia in the upper right-hand corner, and a whole suite of birds and insects and butterflies and reptiles that are found within these systems. And so we try to incorporate our goals for management for a large suite of species and take into consideration their biological needs as well when we're managing these systems. So these are challenging, constraints to work through, but they're also tell us a lot about our management and how to continue management and actually move forward successfully with a lot of this work. So next slide, please. I did wanted to make sure that I mentioned the Sandplain Grassland Network. That's a group of researchers and managers throughout the Northeast, and there's information included within the references and resources section. This group has worked to compile a list of references and gray literature and lots of other information on grasslands throughout the Northeast. Their work is primarily within the sandplain region of New England and the coastal areas, but they also influence the work that we do elsewhere throughout the region. So I think that's it for now, and I look forward to the discussion.
Wonderful. Good morning, good afternoon, all. I am Elizabeth Bach. I am a research scientist with the Nature Conservancy based at the Nechusa Grasslands Preserve. Next slide, please. I'm joining you all this morning from the ancestral homelands of the Peoria, Meskwaki, Sauk, Miami, Kickapoo, Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee nations, all of whom have some ancestral ties to this area. We are located near the Rock River in what is today called the state of Illinois, the northwestern portion of Illinois. And our specific preserve is called Nechusa Grasslands, the word Nechusa meaning long white hair for an early colonist who settled in the area. Next slide, please. The Nature Conservancy began the Nachusa Grasslands project in the mid-1980s, acquiring a few hundred acres of land, which included a few unplowed old-growth grasslands and surrounding agricultural land, with the vision to protect those small hilltop remnants and do some restoration as a buffer to protect them. Over the past nearly 40 years now, the vision has grown, and the preserve now encompasses more than 4,000 acres, most of which is reconstructed or planted into former row crop agricultural fields. The project is known for very high plant diversity in these reconstructions and a very strong community of stewardship around this work. Next slide, please. We are a community with some staff supported through the Nature Conservancy, a wonderful team of volunteers who have been integrated into the project from the beginning, and research scientists who come and conduct research at the preserve that helps inform our management decisions, not only here at Nachusa, but for grassland work beyond. This community of folks are involved in all aspects of the work, from collecting seeds and treating invasive species, being involved on prescribed fire crews, doing that science work, and working with visitors who come to visit Nachusa and have their first experience here on the grasslands. Next slide, please. Nachusa Grasslands is also known because we reintroduced a herd of American buffalo or bison in 2014, so about 10 years ago. And so some folks have heard of us through that work as well. Today, we have a herd of around 100 adult buffalo on the preserve. They have access to 1,500 acres, so about a third of that total 4,000 acres. And the rest of the preserve is ungrazed. So that's some context about me and the work happening here at Nachusa Grasslands, and I look forward to this broader conversation with all of you.
Great. Thank you all. I'd like to mention we're going to put a link in the chat to a grassland resource document that I think you're going to find very helpful. It has a glossary of terms and a whole lot of potentially valuable resources. And note that the link will be active beyond this webinar, so you don't need to rush to view it now. You can copy the link and keep it handy. Okay. Well, I'd like to kick it off by asking the question of what do we mean when we say eastern grasslands? What's special about eastern grasslands, and why are we having this discussion today? Theo, you nodded your head first. I'll let you kick it off.
Yeah, so one thing that comes up right away about eastern grasslands is they were the first grasslands in the United States to just get destroyed. As European settlement moved, hit the Atlantic seaboard and moved west. And so even within that SGI area that I showed, we see this wave of grassland loss where grasslands were being impacted in the 1600s in Virginia and Massachusetts and places on the eastern seaboard. And then it was moving across. And in our western region, we still have some, still pretty small, but sizable chunks of remnant old growth grassland to work from. And we see less and less of that as we go east. The other major thing I think is worth noting is that we have very few really big, extensive, grasslands in the east covering millions of acres. They were mostly interwoven in this big mosaic of woodlands, savannas, forest, all these different habitats in this mosaic in a fairly tight space. So we sat around the other day and tried to think of how many, other than coastal grasslands or salt marshes or something, how many of our eastern grasslands don't involve a woodland component, savanna component around them or within them, and we struggled to think of any. So very much that mosaic, it's a big deal for eastern grasslands.
I can add a little bit to that. Our eastern grasslands within southern New England in New York, the coastal grasslands, some of those are several hundred acres to 400 or 500 acres. And then we have many smaller remnants that we observe within that coastal area. And then as we get toward our inland sites, they are that mosaic found associated with barrens and oak woodlands, and this shifting mosaic on the landscape. And I think the fossil pollen record actually indicates that as well. We know we have charcoal records and indication from the fossil pollen record of these openings, but we don't know how large they were. We do know that fire was on the landscape at some scale, not a very large scale, but it was there. And we know our indigenous partners were using fire over time. So that's really important. I think for us in New England, we're just really learning about our grasslands associated with our riverine systems and our inland sand plains associated with rivers. But most of those systems are on outwash. The larger grasslands are on outwash. They're on outwash sands and gravels, sandy loams, really, sandy loams that have a long history without plowing, but active management through timber harvesting or grazing. Those were the better remnants that we're finding.
Yeah, I'll briefly just build on that a little bit, speaking from the Midwest, where we're kind of on the edge of that transition from those big landscapes of grass into this more mosaic with trees and savannas, and that's certainly the case in Illinois. And I think of moisture tends to support more of that woody vegetation, and I think something that's really critical in my understanding of what's now called Illinois and the ecosystems that are part of it is that it's always been this interaction with humans, with the indigenous nations and communities that have been in Illinois since the retreat of the most recent glaciation 8 to 10,000 years ago. And those people are what have created that mosaic of grasslands, and people are a part of restoring and sustaining these grasslands into the future.
I'll talk a little bit about I mentioned earlier, we're 95% forested, and a lot of the outwash, like was mentioned before, is in the southeast corner of our reservation. And that's where the sands and the pines, more pine, oak, that's where we're focusing. So I asked the panel earlier about what, we're just opening it back up, doing some forest management, creating openings and putting fire back in, and getting good response. Prairie plants that have been in the seed banks for, it had to be 80, 90 years since they've seen fire and have been open like that. So for us, we're really learning. I'm really learning from this group. I'm excited about being here today, but we're just doing, not big landscape pieces, but we're looking for opportunities. We know our ancestors burned. We know they used fire. That was a big blueberry gathering area for them. They were gathering 3,000 bushels of blueberries in the 1850s, 1870s. There's blueberry plants out there. We got some little bit of research. We lost our oral history from our elders, so we really lost the link to how they were burning, why, and what kind of ecosystems that they had. So we're sending the message to our new generation, our younger generation, that's important to the importance of fire, the cultural significance, fire use. We don't bash smoky, but we talk about cultural fire here, and we talk about its importance and doing the outreach and having good fire. We went 150 years without having a good fire back on our land. So, the ecological trauma that the land suffered, we're recognizing that. So we're bringing it back. So we don't have a whole lot of grasslands, but what we're working on is we're learning a lot from it. So.
Theo, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, just one other thing that I meant to say and forgot. Something that sets the eastern grasslands apart is most of the east gets enough rainfall where we would expect forest everywhere. So where we do have grasslands, there's something else at play. There's some other factor responsible for these grasslands, whether that's edaphic site factors, thin soils, steep south aspects, something like that. Large fire compartments without interruptions, like ravines or rivers. Also, the things that the other speakers have mentioned, that ecological processes like fire, or in the case of some grasslands, flooding, natural flooding regimes, so or grazers and browsers that are no longer functioning on the landscape in any meaningful way. So there's big differences from the big grasslands of the Great Plains and the West.
That's a good segue for me. Thank you. In the introduction, Lindsay used the phrase old growth grasslands. Let's start by talking about that phrase in case there's others like me who weren't familiar with that concept prior to that. I mean, what's an old growth grassland? Anybody? Bueller?
I'll jump in. I love the concept of old growth grassland. There's been a lot of discussion recently about what that means and how to define that. And my favorite definitions are there's a paper which I'll pop in the chat. It's probably also in the well, I copied it before the meeting and my it's expired, I guess, in my thing. I'll pop in the chat when I'm done speaking. It's a Veldman et al. Paper. It came out in 2015, sort of proposing this concept of old growth grassland. I don't know that that was the first time, but I've heard that term kicked around. But old growth grasslands that still have intact soil, still have, I love this aspect of the definition, continuity on the landscape. Been here for a long time, essentially unaltered, where there's, the major species in the soils are still intact. It's been open for a long time. We could even go further and say where the seed bank or the bud bank, the rootstock bank, is still persists. In the ecological integrity, that grassland integrity is still present. And once you learn the flora, you know them when you see them. Is all I can really say about that. There are indicators that do not occur in other. They do not remain in other places that have been disturbed. They're only in this, and there's more of this than we think. But oftentimes it's relegated to, especially in the east, older power line corridors, open hayfields that were never converted to the non-native grasses. That's how most of the prairies for where I live in Arkansas, for all of the prairies, survived to present day. They were hay meadows that were never converted, and the haying kept them open. Then there's, yeah, just things that there's just not much of it left, but there's more than people think. We are working in 40 national parks right now, and the National Park Service said there's no remnant grasslands in our northern regions up in Virginia. And our team went out and was surprised to find over 100-acre remnant at Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania National Military Park in Virginia. Had all these uncommon to rare plants hanging on. It had never been plowed. It had never been grazed away to nothing. And it had never been encroached completely by forest. So there's areas out there.
And
I think in New England, I think in New England, similar to what Theo is saying, those areas with sandy loams, like mature soil types that haven't been scraped, that haven't been plowed, that show those indicator plants, those grasses, those herbaceous species that we know have been hanging on for hundreds of years, and we reintroduce fire. It's hard for people to think of a community that's considered old growth that's actually disturbance dependent. Most people think of those two terms as contrary to one another, but actually old growth grasslands have a disturbance history, and natural processes like fire or salt spray are really at play. And you're finding them, as I keep saying, in that shifting mosaic, but the integrity is there for most of these sites. Even if some are, associated with woodlands, or in Massachusetts, some of our rarest plants we were finding in historic cemeteries. And, these beautiful remnant grasslands that had never been plowed for hundreds of years, and the integrity of many of the species found there were indicators for us and helped us locate other sites nearby. And we can more or less define the soil types where we think we may find these, elsewhere.
Yeah, this puts to mind what Ron already mentioned about these areas where they're burning and these plants are coming up from the seed bank. And I think for me, an old growth grassland, or sometimes in our area we call them a remnant grassland, something where that soil disturbance, where you're actually plowing up the soil, has been minimal to none. And these grasslands, because they're disturbance dependent, they can actually withstand quite a bit of change. And I think what amazes me and keeps me so excited about this work are those moments where returning some fire, kind of adjusting those disturbance regimes, and you start to see this expression of native plants and even insects and animals. Is truly a treasure to see that these things are here, they are persisting, and they can be in surprising places. Yeah, that's how I think about it. Are places where that will come back and has persisted over the long term.
I'm listening, Paul. I can talk about old growth timber, not grassland. So I'm all ears on this one.
So the thing I'm hearing through that, and I think this is really interesting, kind of not to make sure, to help keep our focus on the fueling part and the fire, is it sounds like there were potentially a range of sources of disturbance that kept these grasslands intact. And I'm assuming that probably depends on, what the site, they're very site dependent, I'm assuming. Let's talk about the role of fire. Was that pretty typically involved somewhere, or was that really very site specific?
I'm willing to jump in on this one first, and say yes, the fire has kind of always been essential to grasslands in this region. And we have evidence that this fire regime was probably fairly frequent. I'm thinking of some research that a colleague of mine, Cody Considine, did that's in the reference list if you want to look it up, that looked at burn scars in black oak savannas in eastern Illinois and found a fire return interval of about every 2 years. So some of these were very frequent fires, and that's been maintained over centuries, 300 years, as old as some of these trees are. So I think that's some really strong evidence that fire has always been used as a tool, and as such is a really important ecological factor shaping these systems.
I agree with that. I mean, many of our rare species that are found in grasslands are fire dependent. If you look at American chaffseed or sandplain gerardia, they need fire on a fairly routine basis every couple of years, not only to crack the hard seed coat of a sandplain gerardia, but also to help stimulate that soil mycorrhizal association, that many of these plants are hemiparasitic. And so they rely on that fire recharging the soil and helping establish that soil microbial interaction for them to survive. And that's one of the reasons that they are so rare, is that fire is not on the landscape, as much as it should be.
I'll just add, when we started like 30 years ago, we recognized that we wanted to have some more openings in grasslands. But it wasn't until we started doing the growing season burning that we started to see more diversity in the stands. So doing those summer or late summer burns were always they're important. So, and we learned that from being invited around to go burn around the region, around other states and other tribes, burning prairies and stuff. So I always stress that. So I think that's an important part of it.
Thanks for bringing it up, Ron. I think that's a good, another good segue. We've been talking kind of about the looking back part. Let's talk about moving forward. So considering the diversity of sites, considering the diversity of disturbance agents, probably a lack of history on a lot of these sites, how do you kind of develop your plan for moving forward, especially using fire when you probably didn't have a really solid roadmap to get there? And not to say that Elizabeth's job is easier, but I think we probably have a little bit more of a guideline as to how we want to move forward. Ron, I think yours is a great example. How do you build that roadmap moving forward without the piece to look back on to kind of tell you where you've been?
Yeah, I think a lot of these type of talking to people, talking to the experts in grasslands is something we like to do. Just taking the opportunities too. I mean, we were taking opportunities. Again, we're recognized as a timber tribe, so our opportunities we weren't doing landscape. We weren't planning landscape. We wanted to, but we were taking probably on a stand level where we could get these little pieces in that southeast corner and just adding them together. Putting a piece, maybe 40 acres, maybe 100 acres, taking those little pieces and putting them back in where we could, and taking the opportunities to burn them when we could, different times of the year, different seasons, and monitoring. So that's how we started out, and that's what we're continuing to do. We're still adding acres every year. How much do the tribal members want? That's up to them and our communication with them. But we're promoting it. We want a pre-settlement landscape look, and we stress the importance of that. So we're adding that way.
Thank you.
Something that Ron brought up in an earlier discussion we had was that we're seeing species like little bluestem reappear or appear in these woodland openings or settings, and we know we have not seeded those plants within those areas, but they're hanging on, they're remnants within those areas. We see that in our oak openings and woodland settings where those species are still within the floristic community, but they're suppressed. We don't see them until we bring fire back into that system.
I think a lot of success that we've had in trying, or even understanding that we've gained at Southeastern Grasslands Institute at trying to understand where to go, involves looking at reference sites. So we have in a lot of places at least some examples that are remnants that are still intact or in good shape. We can match those with non-biological parameters of the sites that we're working in. Same soil type, maybe same landforms or slope and aspect, and get some idea. We can also learn to read the flora or read the site, what we call reading the site. Go out and see, maybe it's a now forested site and there's nothing on the ground inside but dense leaf litter, but you might have an edge or a roadside through or a power line cut where you can get some semblance of of these what we call conservative heliophytes, these sun-loving grassland remnant plants that might be hanging on. And then also with the mapping work we've done, especially working with some really knowledgeable collaborators like Bryce Hanberry and Reed Nost that are doing this fire modeling, looking at things like fire compartment size, or Cecil Frost, who's done a lot of this work, fire compartment side, prevailing winds, effects of landform on fire behavior, probability of ignition in a large fire compartment, probability of any specific acre burning from a lightning ignition or a human ignition in the past. Those all sort of fall into place, and the whole puzzle kind of makes sense as we understand those factors in our sites, like pairing those up. Really been valuable, I think, for us.
Yeah, I think I'll just add a little bit, thinking more about that kind of future and what we're thinking about. I often say, um, you know, one of the key goals of restoration is setting up these ecosystems to thrive into a future that we know looks and will be different from our past. And in my part of the world, we have a lot of pressure from woody invasive species that a pretty frequent fire interval is our most powerful and effective tool to kind of push back against those invasives and really give these grasslands and savanna ecosystems the opportunity to thrive. And so we see that fire is really being foundational to helping these communities adapt and thrive into a future, knowing that climate is changing and the landscape context is so completely different.
Sadly, our time is already starting to run a little bit short, but there's a question in the chat, and it brings to mind a question that comment Karen brought up in our planning, and it's the idea or the question, is fire just a tool or is fire a process?
It's a process, right? It's. I think we can all talk on that, but it not only helps reduce woody plants, it creates bare soil to assist in the germination of species, but there are so many ecological processes and connections between fire and species that it's a process, like respiration is a process, right? It needs oxygen, it needs fuel, it needs certain weather parameters, and it's variable on the landscape. And that's the wonderful thing about it, because it gives us that mosaic. But when we start looking at the dependence of certain species and the shifts in species composition associated with putting fire on the landscape, we understand that this is a process that's been occurring for thousands of years. So I know others can speak more eloquently about that, I'm sure.
I think, the process was interrupted. We just need to bring the process back.
Right.
I think something else that's been discussed a lot, or being discussed more and more, and it's kind of popped up in the chat, is are we applying these processes like fire within the range of historic variation that they would have occurred in these ecosystems, or are we applying it outside of that, whether that's fire frequency or intensity or seasonality? And one of the things that we are hoping to do is create sort of some maps of things like fire seasonality. What is the historic evidence, whether that comes from tree ring dendroecological analysis or historical records from the early periods when these things were recorded? When did fires burn? We know it's not the same across the east. We know that the outer coastal plain has a spring fire season that's very natural, and species that are very much dependent on fire in that season. We also know that was the exception in some of the interior regions, like the interior highlands or the upper Midwest, that most fires historically occurred more in the fall. And so not that everything always burned in that time, but how does that pattern of probability or historical seasonality or intensity or whatever it is fit in with what our goals are for these sites and for the biodiversity on these sites? I think that's a real important question.
I think we have to be somewhat adaptive in our understanding of former fire regimes or current fire regimes, because our climate is changing so quickly. Most of us in the Northeast did not consider the flash droughts, that we are experiencing now within the Northeast, and the wildfire incidents that are more frequent now. So I think fire was probably pretty variable on the landscape. We know from those rare species and some of the indicator species that the fire frequency was, it was every 2 to 3 years in many of these systems, but I guess we have to look at it as this shifting mosaic, and that's what becomes hard. And as a manager of rare and endangered species, these areas become hotspots for biodiversity, and we're managing grasslands that are not that large, but have a high diversity of species. So it's a consideration of a number of species and trying to maintain the integrity of the grassland remnant itself.
Yeah, I'll just briefly add, I think we have to be a bit adaptive because the current and future pressures are different from those historical pressures. And I think learning and approaching this landscape and ecosystem humbly is really important as we think about how to facilitate these processes that happened over millennia and how to ensure that they continue to happen so these ecosystems thrive for hopefully centuries more.
Yes, the question is, are the species in these ecosystems adaptive as we have to be, or do they require more narrow ranges of variation? I think that's the big challenge.
It's a combination of both.
Well, folks, I think we're about to bump up to our time. Unfortunately, it's been really a lot of good discussion. I'm loving all the conversation I'm seeing in the chat. There's really just a lot of important questions that kind of guide how we think about what the work we do. And I'm glad to see so many people, so many good thinkers here on our panel, and so many good thinkers and thoughts within the chat, and knowing that people are really wrestling with some tough questions. And again, I want to point out, we just put in the chat the information about the SAF credits. For those of you who want to apply for that, there's the link there. And I'm going to pause and say, I'm going to hand it back to Lindsay to wrap us up. Or do we have more time?
Right, we have till 12:30, Paul.
Oh, 12:30.
Oh, fun.
Yay. Great. I thought we had good. Let's go. So I think there's a couple interesting points that I was hoping we'd get to then. So that last discussion, I think, is really good for thinking about how do we set our goals for these properties and these parcels and these old grasslands, especially with that idea that there is change. We are in a time of change, and that product we're trying to hit, that state, may not be the state that it was in prior. How do you set our goals and our objectives for these landscapes?
Yeah, I'm willing to try and tackle this. And in part because we've been thinking about that on our team a lot recently. We kind of every 5 years do a review of our conservation goals and think about where we're going and all of that. And for I think there's a little bit of two sides of this. One is I think having some core goals that are really stable. And I have the privilege of working at a project that's been around for 40 years, and we're hoping it will be around for, maybe 140 more years. And that's a real kind of consistent goal around restoring the native grasslands and savanna systems, using reference sites where they're available and continuously learning and pushing ourselves. And that means visiting other sites. That means being in community, like with all of you, learning from each other, learning with scientists who are doing research here. And so the other kind of key thing that has been so important to our project is that community and using that community as part of our learning and how we're doing the work. So there's a very strong focus on restoring these processes, fire, these interactions between animals and plants, be that insects, be that birds, be that grazers like buffalo, and constantly learning from each other about the system and how it's responding, and with an eye towards the future and those different changes. So I might have waxed a little bit there, but I think the goals are, I actually would say process goals are really great in terms of setting up a community and a way to constantly learn and adapt to the system, and to always be looking to those reference sites for guidance is very helpful.
I agree with that. I think that was well said. And, we're constantly reassessing our goals for many of our grasslands. We're constantly reevaluating threats, whether they're invasive species or woody invasion. And we have challenges in terms of many of our really our high priority grasslands are within areas that are highly developed within whether it's a community, the tourist community, and people don't like smoke, and you're dealing with other issues associated with fire management. But I think as long as we're continuing to provide the outreach and actually communicate with others the importance of these systems and work. For me, I'm a land manager. My work relies on that research community to provide me the backing. So working with research communities as well as land managers and providing that critical outreach and communication. And I every year we have 2 or 3 large field tours with our restoration community, and I learned so much from those efforts when people come and visit and share their experiences. And I'm hoping we get to do that with all of us here at some point in the near future. So that's all really important to keep us on the right track. And we have these internal goals. We do that planning and we're managing for the community and the species, but it's really important to keep that check in mind and work together.
Our forest management plan was written, it's coming for a rewrite 2027. But in that plan, there wasn't a lot of target acres for grassland. Again, being a timber past managers and timber sawmill, all of those things. But so for us to, we're definitely going to add to it. We're going to have a acreage of grassland. We're going to have a target acreage in there that we're going to talk to the community about, but just to show the benefits. not just the ecological benefits, the cultural benefits, and then the cultural burning, maybe allowing them to get out and participate and let them put fire back on the land.
So I like that idea of the adaptive objective. Would I keep assessing that? But here's a more of a mechanical process question. How do you monitor your success at that point? I mean, literally, how do you monitor? Do you monitor? And what are some of the things folks can take from that to help them? I know a lot of people get kind of nervous when they hear monitoring. They think data intensive transects but I'd like to hear from you all about that idea of kind of monitoring progress, if nothing else.
Don't forget to do a photo points before and after. Take the time before to do that photo point, because you won't ever get back to that precondition after you do something, and it's worth 1,000 words for sure. We've done all different things, and in my work before, I was at the Grasslands Institute. We did a bunch of different things. Transects, designed to be more rapid than big square plots or whatever. Just as long as you do something to and monitor what you're actually interested in. If you're interested in grassland bird response, obviously you got to monitor grassland birds. But if you're interested in rare species, you got to take the time to go in ahead and census your numbers of your chaff seed or whatever it is you're working on, and then do it over time. You're not going to get a response in a lot of these ecosystems the first burn or even maybe several. And then of course, if you're doing a reconstruction, we talked about this in some of our pre-conversations. I can't tell you how many projects where we did reconstructions. We had a 2-year funding project period with the funding. And, you don't get the response. You spend the first year treating the site to get it ready to plant, then you plant it. And all you get that second year is the weeds and tiny seedlings. And so they want their report at the end of the 2-year project period. And you need 2 more years, at least, maybe 10 more years to show the success that you've gotten. So patience is involved sometimes.
Yeah,
That's so true. I feel like, a lot of our vegetation monitoring, we're on 10-year cycles to really understand, the effects of ongoing management. And then there are other types of surveys and monitoring where we can actually show success fairly quickly, such as the grassland bird monitoring, where species come in very quickly after we make that structural change within that community. So it's really important to monitor at different levels if you have the capacity to do that, whether it's bird surveys or Lepidoptera surveys, and because they all tell us very different things about the diversity within those grasslands.
yeah. One of my biggest pieces of advice that I'll offer is monitoring. It's better to take the time to think about how are you going to do this with the capacity that you have than to get sucked into trying to think about something with, a Western science statistical replication and how are we going to analyze this. I always say having 20 years of data that somebody had the capacity to go collect there are plenty of statistical tools we can analyze that, as opposed to a rigorous approach that is so complex that after 2 cycles of cycling, people just give up on it, or someone, jobs change and the new person is just like, oh, this is too complicated. So I always like to just keep it really simple. And that can be taking a walk in the field and writing down some notes. I noticed these plants. And also when you do, especially reconstruction, just keep track of here's what was in the seed mix and here were the conditions when we planted it. Just keeping good notes gets you a really long way. If you have the capacity to do some simple monitoring, maybe, what we started with at Nachusa in the 1990s was putting in some permanent transects, and they were marked at the time, usually with a tree or a fence post or something like that. Nowadays we have it all on GPS, but and it was they were there, and when there was capacity or a budget to hire a consulting botanist to come out and collect the data, they would. And so it wasn't on a strict, consistent rotation, but those transects got revisited multiple times over 20, 30 years. And because of that, there was an approach that we could use to synthesize and analyze that. And it was really used to check in, like, oh, okay, are we still seeing these plants and these old growth remnants that we know are special, we want to see there? Are we seeing the plants that we put in our seed mix in those reconstructions? So think about your capacity and think about what's sustainable given your level of work. And think about, all right, it's going to take me 2 to 3 work days to do this, and I'm willing to do that and commit to that. Or this is going to take me a month of my work time, and there's no way I can consistently do that. Use that as your metric, and really use that as your guiding force.
Nice, thank you. Yeah, in my experience, too many places we don't do, I call it objective assessment. I think we need to do a little bit more of that. It's easy to kind of go with your guts, and those aren't always so accurate. So thank you very much. One of the questions we hear a lot too is about managing invasives, especially woody invasives. We use fire, we have other tools as well. I mean, how do you balance out the use of multiple tools? Again, we're mostly kind of fire-based here, but in this series, but we want to, we think more broadly. So let's talk about how we kind of use multiple tools to address our invasives, especially our woody invasives.
And how do we incorporate those tools so that they're not in conflict with each other, right? That's sometimes really hard to manage and juggle if we're using mowing, or we're using herbicides to control a particular woody invasive, and making sure that it's in a schedule such that, we are still keeping on track with our prescribed fire while successfully executing those other activities. So woody invasives and herbaceous invasives are a problem in many of our grasslands. Black swallowwort is a more recent species that's come into many of our grasslands, and a number of woody problem species that are not necessarily invasive, but invading some of these habitats.
We've had some interesting results manipulating the seasonality of fire. I learned in burn school that if you want to hurt the woody plants, you need to burn early in the spring and you'll really hurt them. But that doesn't hold with anything we've seen. We've had the best results burning in the late summer or early fall, and really before the plants go dormant. And I have a hypothesis that when you injure these woody plants at that time and they don't have the ability to heal themselves with new growth at the end of the season, they're subjected to pathogens and fungi and all sorts of things all winter long. And it really hammers them. If you burn these plants in March, they're going to immediately, sumac and sassafras and a lot of these species that are invading the grasslands, those immediately resprout from the roots and heal themselves and get a lot of growth from that rootstock that's been there. That doesn't maybe hold in every region, that timing, but it certainly for our interior grassland seems to be what we're learning. We also use herbicide and other treatments in different situations. I'm again back to looking at these historical ranges of variation in fire and seeing how we can learn from those.
Hey Ron, how about in your environment? Because you painted us a picture where the woodies are definitely dominant on the landscape, but you have some openings, and so I'm curious about kind of how those boundaries shift, or if they don't shift, or if they're hard boundaries, and kind of how you keep things the way you want them, the way you've designed, your community has decided they want them.
Yeah, we're pretty fortunate with the invasives. I mean, looking at I describe our resource as a snapshot of what Wisconsin would look like, pre-settlement. It's really untouched in the forested areas. So the invasives actually only are in the old settlements, the old homesteads where people were living when they came back to the reservation. Or we had it's another topic, but we were terminated for several years from the government recognition, and during those times there was more things going on. So we're controlling those, some of it with herbicide and some of it with fire, but actually those old openings are opportunities. They were open areas. They were kept open, obviously abandoned settlements and stuff like that. So yeah, and the edges, it's not it, it's hard. It's hard to get the I don't say it's hard. It's important to educate or the importance of what we're doing because of the timber. The whole generation we have is just known timber and timber resource and logging and cutting, importance of that. So why open it up? Why put fire in there? What are we taking away opportunities from managing our forests that way? So it's a balance that we're learning, but we're doing enough outreach, we're educating enough to be able to keep it going and to have these openings. But yeah, we're for what we have open, we've been able to maintain. That's the other key, funding, personnel. We have the early years we didn't have enough burn boss. Now we have three. So we have three qualified RXB2s, a chain of young firefighters that are building their qualifications up. So our ability to do our own burning, we do mechanical work as well. So we'll open up a pine stand, treat the fuels, hazard fuel reduction, and then bring fire back in. So we're able to use some of the funding that we have. We're creating more opportunities like that.
Let's keep on that human component for a minute. Do you have trouble convincing folks that these places need to be protected? And if so, how do you make that argument? Go ahead.
I'll start. We sometimes have difficulty in making the argument that we need openings within a barren setting or a woodland setting, and so that requires more intensive sort of outreach and explanation for why that work is needed. But most of the grasslands, I think the grasslands, people enjoy visiting grasslands. We have a lot of bird watchers that come in from different parts of the country just to visit some of these grasslands and view some of the birds that occur there and nowhere else. And including for us blue grosbeaks that have just started nesting in our grasslands within the Northeast. So those are all exciting things, and butterfly watchers and people, interested in many different natural history venues enjoy grasslands, I think. So I don't think that that's an issue. It's when we're working in these transition zones where we have openings within barrens or woodlands that that messaging really needs to be carefully brought forward.
Theo, your hand's up.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, I'm engaging in the chat a little bit here and there as well. I think my points have just been made. I'm gonna.
I think I'd just like to add one angle on this, and that there's protecting a natural area, and particularly when you're talking about these grasslands and these openings within these matrix, there's managing and stewarding these grasslands. And I think that sometimes is a different argument to make, in that sometimes there's a lot of areas that they are protected and they're valued, and yet we have limited budgets and resources and capacities to do the stewardship work, to kind of maintain that biodiversity. And so I think that's a really critical question. And I think some of Ron's points about um, rebuilding that culture of stewardship and caretaking of these ecosystems. And I think that that's a principle that can apply across a lot of different organizations and agencies doing this work of how do you cultivate the next generation of talent? How do you progress people through these qualifications to do fire, to do management, to gain the knowledge and to build that community generation to generation, to do that work? I think that in today's day and age is actually maybe a more important question than is it protected or not legally.
And we talk about traditional ecological knowledge. It doesn't have to be old.
Yeah.
We're developing it now.
I would just like to make one overarching point here about protection and grasslands in the East. They are the last thing that people are putting money into. I mean, people are protecting big, dramatic landscapes with scenic views. There's lots of work on forests and wetlands and rivers and coastal ecosystems, and grasslands have just consistently gotten the bottom of the barrel in attention and funding. And that's one reason we started the Southeastern Grasslands Institute. Is we were just so discouraged by it. And it's even worse when, I mean, part of it is this sort of, they've been lost from our collective consciousness, right? Like, people don't understand we even had grasslands in the East. And then, there's sad little things along a power line corridor or in a little hayfield. But they're so critical for biodiversity. And one thing that has really resonated now in the last 10 years is these are the places where we get all the seed for all of the things that we want to do, the bigger recreations and restorations that we're doing. So we're really trying to sell these remnants as special places that are the future of grassland restoration, reconstruction.
I know for us in Massachusetts, grasslands are a critically rare habitat type, our native grasslands. They are what we call a tier 1 habitat or community for management and restoration. And the number of rare species within grasslands are really almost unparalleled with other habitat types. So I think you're right, Theo, that it's, we may have a 30-acre remnant on the landscape, and it's got this tremendous biodiversity.
It's precious, but it's a real pain in the ass at the same time. And, I mean, that's the thing about these remnants, is they take forever management.
They
It's
do.
not like a forest. You can protect a mesic forest and leave alone, and it's very cheap after you buy it. But these grasslands are a nonstop cost sink, and you got to have volunteer core, and it takes a lot of effort and coordination.
It's an ecosystem that's the product of a community of people, and that community of people has to be part of the future of those grasslands.
They do.
And
that's right.
Yeah.
Well, I think I'm going to go a little bit different direction for our kind of last couple minutes. And I want to open this certainly to the chat as well, as what are some of the important research needs for these and other grasslands? What do we need to be looking into? And again, if folks in the chat, please weigh in.
So many things. I mean, we know so little about these systems. That's just the elephant in the room here. Like, what's happening underground with these soil microbial communities? How do they interact with the plants? We just barely know anything about this stuff. What are these historic ranges of variations in these ecological processes? How did they interact on the landscape? Those are just a couple of big ones that I think. I mean, the thing about the microbiome in the soil, doing reconstructions, that really just like those things pop up in your mind immediately. You plant these things,
Right.
certain things never come up, and you grow them in pots, and they get great germination, and then they all die. And what are is there chemical signatures to get some things to germinate from chemicals and smoke and ash, and there's a million questions. I don't even know where to start to answer that question, unfortunately.
Well,
I
we do
think
need to start. Pick some spots.
our grasslands are undervalued in terms of sequestering carbon, and our understanding of carbon sequestration and carbon banking within grasslands. And so I certainly would like to see more research there to support that work. And I know there is ongoing research now, but they're undervalued systems in that way, I think.
I'm going to actually come back to this point we made about these short funding cycles. I think long-term research where people are coming back year after year, decade after decade to really understand, particularly through these reconstructions and in this efforts to maybe flip a stable state. That long-term dedication is so important, and it is not well funded. It's challenging, for all of the reasons we've already talked about. And so I think I'll just use an answer I've already said, which is keeping something simple and keeping good notes and some sort of basic monitoring that you have the capacity to come back to over the long haul. Those are really, I think, priority opportunities. And if you're somewhere where you've got 5 or maybe 8 years of this kind of monitoring, prioritize, figure out how to keep that going, because that long-term information is so rare and so important.
I like that idea, Elizabeth, in that there are lots of topics, but the ones we invest the time in are probably going to give us the most information, right?
That's right.
I think this time we're in our last few minutes. I guess I'll leave it open for any last minute comments, any go backs or thoughts, or just kind of a minute or two of disco. If anybody has anything else they want to add.
I've got an anecdotal response to the latest item in the chat. Has impacts on ticks been studied? I almost never get ticks from a day in a managed grassland. Almost never. In my whole career, 30 years of going out into these systems, almost never. But yeah, I really am convinced. I can't do a statistical analysis on it, but it makes sense to me that they really do help manage ticks for sure. And I've heard that's some traditional ecological knowledge right there. That has long been a reason that indigenous people burned these landscapes. So makes sense to me.
There is some ongoing research at SUNY ESF regarding ticks and fire, and there is the Michael Gallagher publications research related to ticks. So some of that information will be included in the references and resources as well.
Awesome. Thanks again, everybody. It's been a great hour and a half, and I wish we could go for the rest of the morning or afternoon, depending on where you are, and I'm sure we could. So thanks again for all the time it takes for you all to do this, because it's really important, and I appreciate everybody who showed up on all our participants and attendees. Lindsay.
Yeah, I'll just echo everything that Paul just said. Elizabeth, Ron, Theo, and Karen, it's been an absolute pleasure listening to you. I took a ton of notes. I learned a lot, so I appreciate it. And I know all of your schedules are really busy, so we really appreciate all the time and the effort that you put into this. And thank you to the participants. As Paul said, this is what we do it for. So having everyone show up is awesome. And Paul, thank you for flawlessly being the moderator. You did an excellent job. Just a little plug, we will send everyone an evaluation at the end. If you could just take a few minutes to complete that evaluation, we would really appreciate it. We do look at the results and how we can do better next time. And all the evaluations are anonymous as well. And then again, our next panel discussion is on December 11th, and it's Do You Hear What I Hear? A Sensory Portrait of Wildland Fire. Thanks, everyone.